I still remember the exact moment I heard it. Sitting under that harsh white light, the sterile smell in the air, the faint sound of metal instruments clinking somewhere behind me. The dentist leaned back slightly, looked at the scans, and then at me, and said something that didn't feel like a diagnosis. It felt like a sentence. "It's too late." For a second, I didn't even react. It was like my brain refused to process it. Too late for what? Too late to fix? Too late to recover? Too late to keep something as basic as my own teeth? And in that silence, something heavy settled in my chest. Because deep down, I already knew I hadn't been taking care of things the way I should. I had ignored the early signs, the bleeding gums, the sensitivity, the occasional pain that came and went. Life gets busy, and we convince ourselves that small problems can wait. Until one day, they don't. As I sat there, I started imagining everything that would come next. Implants. Root canals. Procedures I had only heard about in passing, now suddenly becoming my reality. And then came the second wave, not fear this time, but something colder. The cost. Because no one really prepares you for that part. It's not just about health, it's about access. It's about looking at solutions that exist, but feel completely out of reach. Thousands of dollars. Multiple appointments. Time off work. And suddenly, you're not just dealing with a dental issue, you're dealing with a life decision. I remember walking out of that office in a kind of fog. The receptionist smiled and handed me a treatment plan folder. I didn't open it until I got to my car. When I finally did, the numbers jumped off the page like accusations. $12,000. Maybe more, depending on complications. Payment plans available, of course, but that just meant stretching the financial burden across months instead of facing it all at once. I sat there, folder in my lap, staring at nothing. And that's when the real weight of it hit me. This wasn't just about money I didn't have. It was about time I couldn't afford to take off. It was about the anxiety of sitting through multiple procedures, the recovery periods, the uncertainty of whether any of it would even work long-term. It was about looking at my future and seeing a version of myself I wasn't ready to accept. But more than anything, it was about the isolation. Because when you're dealing with something like this, you quickly realize how alone you are in it. People don't talk about dental problems the way they talk about other health issues. There's a strange shame attached to it. Like it's automatically your fault. Like you should have known better, done better, cared more. And so you stop mentioning it. You stop asking for advice. You stop reaching out. And what hurts the most is that people don't talk about it. They don't talk about the quiet way it starts affecting everything. The way you stop smiling in photos. The way you cover your mouth when you laugh. The way you become hyper-aware of something that used to be completely natural. I started noticing it everywhere. Conversations where I held back. Moments where I chose silence over expression. It wasn't just about teeth anymore. It was about confidence. Identity. Presence. Family gatherings became minefields. Someone would tell a joke, and I'd feel the laugh rising, and then I'd catch myself. Hand to mouth. Forced smile. The kind of self-consciousness that roots itself so deep, you start to forget what it felt like to just exist without thinking about it. I stopped going out as much. Declined invitations. Made excuses that sounded reasonable but were really just ways to avoid being seen. And the worst part was how gradual it all was. How I didn't even notice I was shrinking my world until I looked around one day and realized how small it had become. And if you've ever felt that, you know exactly what I'm talking about. At that point, I genuinely believed I had reached some kind of irreversible line. That whatever damage had been done, was done. That the only way forward was through expensive, invasive procedures, or simply learning to live with it. I started researching dental tourism. Looking at clinics in Mexico, Costa Rica, places where the same procedures cost a fraction of what they did here. I read reviews, looked at before and after photos, tried to calculate whether the risk was worth the savings. But even that felt like surrendering something. Like admitting I had let things get so bad that my only options were desperate ones. Then there were the online forums. Threads full of people in similar situations, sharing their stories, their fears, their regrets. Some had gone through with the procedures and were dealing with complications. Others were still waiting, still hoping, still trapped in that limbo between decision and action. And a few had simply given up, accepted it, resigned themselves to a reality they never wanted. I didn't want to be any of those people. But I didn't see another path. But here's the part no one told me. That too late isn't always what it seems. A few days after that appointment, still carrying that weight, I started looking deeper. Not for miracle cures, but for understanding. I wanted to know what actually happens in the mouth when things begin to break down. What causes gums to recede? Why teeth weaken? And more importantly, whether the body has any capacity to respond once things have progressed. I wasn't looking for false hope. I was looking for truth. And what I found was more complex than I expected. That's when I came across something that completely shifted my perspective. Not a promise. Not a quick fix. But information. Studies around oral microbiome balance. The role of specific bacteria in gum disease progression. The connection between inflammation and tissue breakdown. And something even more surprising. Documented cases where, under the right conditions, early-stage damage wasn't just halted, it showed signs of partial reversal. I remember reading one particular study late at night, the kind of clinical paper most people would find dry and inaccessible. But to me, in that moment, every paragraph felt like a door opening. It talked about how the mouth isn't just a collection of teeth and gums. It's an entire ecosystem. And like any ecosystem, when the balance shifts, everything changes. When harmful bacteria outnumber beneficial ones, they don't just sit there. They produce acids. They trigger immune responses. They create biofilms that protect themselves while attacking your tissue. And over time, that constant assault leads to what dentists see on their scans, the visible damage. But here's what caught my attention. The study also discussed intervention points, moments where the progression could be interrupted, where the environment could be shifted back toward balance, where the body's own healing mechanisms, which never fully disappear, could be supported rather than overwhelmed. That was the first crack in the certainty I had accepted, because if the process that leads to deterioration is biological, then influencing that biology might change the trajectory. And that's when everything started to make sense in a different way. Most people think dental problems are purely mechanical. Brush harder. Floss more. Fix what's broken. But what I was discovering pointed to something deeper. A shift in the internal environment of the mouth. When harmful bacteria dominate, they trigger chronic inflammation. That inflammation doesn't just stay on the surface. It begins to affect the supporting structures of the teeth. Gums weaken. Bone support can gradually diminish. And over time, the visible damage is just the final stage of a process that's been happening silently. I started thinking about it like a forest. When you see dead trees, your first instinct is to cut them down, replant, fix the visible problem. But if the soil is toxic, if the water is contaminated, if the entire ecosystem is out of balance, those new trees won't survive either. You have to address the environment first. You have to restore what makes growth possible. The mouth works the same way. You can scrape away plaque. You can fill cavities. You can even replace teeth. But if the underlying environment that created the problem hasn't changed, the problem returns. Maybe not immediately. Maybe not in the same form. But it returns. And that's what no one had explained to me before. But here's the key. When that environment begins to shift back, when beneficial bacteria are supported, when inflammation is reduced, when specific habits are aligned with how the body actually maintains oral tissue, something changes. Not overnight, not magically, but measurably. I found testimonials from people who had been in similar situations. People who had been told they needed immediate surgery, aggressive treatments, extensive intervention. And then, after making specific changes to their oral care approach, their follow-up appointments showed something different. Reduced pocket depths, less bleeding, stabilized bone levels. In some cases, actual tissue regeneration. Their dentists were surprised. Some were skeptical. A few even dismissed it as coincidence or measurement error. But the people living it knew better. Because when you've been tracking every symptom, every sensation, every small change for months, you know when something real is happening. That realization hit me hard, because it meant the story wasn't as final as I had been told. Now, I'm not saying every case can be reversed. That would be unrealistic. Some situations do require clinical intervention, and delaying necessary treatment can make things worse. But what I am saying is this. There is a window, often larger than people think, where the body still responds, where progression can be slowed, where damage can be stabilized, and in some cases, where improvement is possible. I started paying attention to my own symptoms with a different mindset. Not just resignation, but observation. I noticed that my gums bled more in the mornings. That certain foods triggered more sensitivity than others. That stress seemed to make everything worse. These weren't random facts. They were data points. Clues about what was happening beneath the surface. And once I understood the mechanism, I could start working with it instead of against it. That's exactly why we left a practical guide in the first link in the description, so you can access it quickly and see how this approach works step by step. Because what changed things for me wasn't a single product or a secret trick. It was understanding the system, adjusting daily habits, supporting the biological processes that are already there, but often ignored. I changed my morning routine, not drastically, but intentionally. I started paying attention to the pH balance in my mouth. Most people don't realize that every time you eat or drink something acidic, you're creating an environment where harmful bacteria thrive. And if you immediately brush in that acidic state, you're actually doing more damage than good, scrubbing weakened enamel with abrasive force. So I adjusted the timing. I rinsed with water first. Let my saliva do its job of neutralizing acids naturally. Then brushed with technique, not just force. I looked at what I was putting in my mouth beyond just food. The mouthwashes I'd been using contained alcohol, which research shows can disrupt the oral microbiome. The toothpaste I'd trusted for years had ingredients that were harsh on already compromised tissue. I switched to products that supported balance instead of destroying everything indiscriminately. And I added targeted support. Not random supplements, but specific nutrients that research connected to gum health and tissue repair. Vitamin C for collagen synthesis. Vitamin D for immune modulation. Coenzyme Q10 for cellular energy in gum tissue. Omega-3s to reduce systemic inflammation. Again, not miracles, just biology. And the more I applied it, the more I noticed subtle changes. Less bleeding, less sensitivity, a feeling of strength returning, slowly, but consistently. The first time I bit into an apple without wincing, I actually stopped mid-chew. It had been so long since I could do that without pain, I'd forgotten what normal felt like. And in that small moment, something shifted, not just physically, but emotionally. Because hope, when it's been absent long enough, doesn't return as a flood. It returns as a whisper, a small signal that maybe, just maybe, things don't have to keep getting worse. And maybe the most important shift wasn't physical at first. It was mental. That feeling of being trapped started to fade. That belief that it was too late started to lose its grip. I stopped avoiding mirrors, stopped planning my life around hiding, stopped feeling like my body had betrayed me in some irreversible way. Instead, I started seeing it as something more dynamic, something that could respond, something that was always trying to heal, if I just gave it what it needed. And in its place, something else began to grow. Curiosity. Because once you realize that what you've been told isn't the full picture, you start asking better questions. You start looking at your health differently. You stop seeing your body as something that just breaks, and start seeing it as something that responds, that adapts, that, under the right conditions, can recover more than we give it credit for. I went back to the dentist 6 months after that initial appointment, the one where I'd been told it was too late. I didn't mention what I'd been doing. I just scheduled a routine cleaning and exam, curious to see what the objective measurements would show. The hygienist started the exam, probing around my gums, calling out numbers to the assistant. I watched her face, waited for the concern, the frown, the confirmation that nothing had changed. But instead, she paused, checked her notes from my previous visit, probed again. And then she said something I wasn't expecting. Your inflammation has decreased significantly. Pocket depths are down across the board. Whatever you've been doing, keep doing it. I didn't celebrate in that moment. I just nodded. But inside, something fundamental had shifted. Because it wasn't about proving anyone wrong. It wasn't about being right. It was about reclaiming agency over my own health. That's why we also made sure to leave another access point in the first link in the description, where you can explore the method that's helping people who feel stuck between expensive treatments and the fear of it being too late. Because no one should feel like they've run out of options without understanding what those options really are. The truth is, the dental industry operates on a certain model, a necessary model in many cases, but not the only model. There's an entire dimension of oral health that gets overlooked because it doesn't fit neatly into the appointment procedure payment structure. It's the dimension of daily influence, of micro-choices compounding over time, of working with biology instead of only intervening when biology has already failed. And when you tap into that, when you understand that your mouth is a living system, not just a collection of parts waiting to break, you realize how much power you actually have. Not power to avoid ever needing professional care. That's not realistic. But power to influence the trajectory, to slow progression, to support healing, to make necessary interventions less frequent, less invasive, less expensive. And if there's one thing this experience taught me, it's this. Final words are rarely as final as they sound. Sometimes, they're just the limit of what was considered in that moment. And when you expand that perspective, when you bring in knowledge, observation, and a deeper understanding of how the body works, doors start to appear where there were none before. I think about that version of myself, sitting in that dental chair, hearing those words, "It's too late," and how absolutely final they felt. How definitive. How crushing. And I think about where I am now. Not perfect. Not problem-free. But no longer trapped. No longer resigned. No longer convinced that my only options were expensive surrender or slow decline. I found a third option. And it wasn't hidden. It wasn't secret. It wasn't reserved for people with special access or inside knowledge. It was just overlooked. Buried under assumptions, dismissed as too simple, ignored because it required understanding instead of just compliance. So if you're in that place right now, feeling like time has already decided for you, just know this. There may still be more to your story than you've been told. And sometimes, The unexpected doesn't come from luck. It comes from finally seeing what was always there, just waiting to be understood. The mouth is resilient. More resilient than we give it credit for. It's designed to maintain itself, to heal minor damage, to adapt to challenges. And when we support those natural processes instead of just waiting for them to fail, the results can surprise even the professionals who thought they'd seen everything. But it requires something most people don't want to give: attention, consistency, patience. In a world that promises instant solutions, the idea that daily choices compound into significant change feels almost revolutionary. But that's exactly how biology works. Not in dramatic interventions, but in persistent, aligned effort. And the people who discover this, the ones who shift from passive patients to active participants in their own oral health, they're the ones who rewrite their stories. They're the ones who go back for checkups and hear confusion in their dentist's voice. This shouldn't have improved this much. They're the ones who avoid surgeries they were told were inevitable. They're the ones who reclaim their smiles, their confidence, their freedom from constant worry. Not because they found a miracle, but because they found understanding. And they acted on it. If this kind of content speaks to you, and you want to keep exploring insights like this, grounded, real, and built on understanding rather than fear, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Because there's a lot more that people aren't being told, and we're just getting started. This isn't the end of the conversation. It's just the beginning. And if you've made it this far, you already know something important about yourself. You're not looking for easy answers. You're looking for real ones. And that makes all the difference.